HOA Karen called cops after son demanded my Mustang, didn't know I'm the police chief. Entitled people, the HOA Queen's downfall. When entitlement meets justice. Chapter 1, the storm at my door. The pounding on my garage door sounded like someone was trying to break it down with a sledgehammer. Each thunderous bang echoed through my modest 3-bedroom home, rattling the windows and sending my morning coffee rippling in its mug. I glanced at the clock, 7:30 a.m. on a Saturday. Who in their right mind would be making such a racket at this ungodly hour? But deep down, I already knew who it would be. Over the past 3 weeks, I'd become intimately familiar with this particular brand of neighborhood chaos. Setting down my coffee with deliberate calm, I walked toward the noise, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. Through the small garage window, I could see her, Patricia Dalton, our self-appointed HOA president, red-faced and screaming something about a stolen vehicle. Her bleached blonde hair, usually styled to perfection, was disheveled from her early morning rage. Behind her stood her son Tyler, arms crossed, wearing that smug expression I'd come to despise over the past 3 weeks. "Open this door immediately." Patricia's voice pierced through the metal like a knife through butter. "I know you're hiding stolen property in there. The police are already on their way." I couldn't help but smile at that last part. If only she knew what she'd just walked into. I grabbed my badge from the kitchen counter, the weight of it familiar in my hand after 20 years of service. 20 years of dealing with people like Patricia, though none quite as entitled as the woman currently assaulting my garage door. I clipped it to my belt and walked to the front door instead of the garage, taking my time. The look on her face when she saw me standing there, calm as could be, was almost worth all the harassment I'd endured. "Almost. Mrs. Dalton," I said, my voice carrying the authority of 2 decades in law enforcement. "Beautiful morning, isn't it?" Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Tyler's cocky expression faltered for just a moment before he regained his composure, though I could see the uncertainty creeping into his eyes. But you." Patricia stammered, her finger pointing accusingly at me. "You're the thief. You stole that car." "Let me back up," I said, leaning against my doorframe, "and tell you exactly how we got here." Chapter 2, New Beginnings and Old Grudges. 3 weeks ago, I moved into this neighborhood in Riverside Heights. After 20 years of apartment living, saving every penny, I'd finally been promoted to chief of police for the city and could afford to buy my first house. Nothing fancy, just a modest 3-bedroom with a 2-car garage, perfect for my most prized possession. A 1969 Ford Mustang Boss 429 in grabber blue. I'd spent 5 years restoring that car with my late father, Henry Morrison. Every bolt, every panel, every detail was perfect. We'd worked on it in his garage every weekend, well-stained hands moving in practiced synchronization as we brought the beast back to life. It wasn't just a car, it was the last project we'd finished together before cancer took him 6 months ago. The day I bought the house, I drove the Mustang from Dad's garage to mine, the 429 Cobra jet engine purring like a contented lion. Neighbors came out to watch as I pulled into my driveway, the sun gleaming off the fresh coat of grabber blue paint. Most of them smiled and waved, appreciating the classic American muscle. Most, but not all. Patricia Dalton lived 4 houses down with her 17-year-old son Tyler and her husband Richard, a tax attorney who looked perpetually exhausted. From the moment I stepped out of my moving truck, she made it clear she ran this neighborhood like her personal kingdom. The first time I met her, she was already marching down the sidewalk with purpose, her heels clicking against the concrete like a metronome set to aggressive. She handed me a 3-inch binder labeled HOA Guidelines and Expectations and informed me that my moving truck had been parked 2 minutes over the approved time limit. "We run a tight ship here in Riverside Heights," she'd said, her bleached blonde hair perfectly styled despite the 90-degree heat. She wore a crisp white blazer with an HOA pin prominently displayed, as if it were a badge of honor. "I trust you'll be a compliant addition to our community." I'd smiled, taken the binder, and thanked her for her thoroughness. I said nothing about my job. After 20 years in law enforcement, I'd learned to keep my professional life separate from my personal life. The last thing I needed was neighbors treating me differently because of my position, either with fake friendliness or suspicious distance. "The HOA dues are $200 monthly," Patricia continued, consulting a clipboard that seemed to have materialized from thin air. "The landscaping committee meets every Tuesday at 7 p.m. sharp. Garbage cans must be brought in by 6 p.m. on collection day. Any exterior modifications require board approval, and we don't allow commercial vehicles in driveways. Understood, I replied, though I was already mentally noting several violations I could see just from standing in my own driveway. The house across the street had a basketball hoop that was clearly over the regulation height, and 2 houses down had garden gnomes that definitely weren't mentioned in the approved decorative items list she'd just shown me. But I wasn't here to cause trouble. I just wanted to enjoy my retirement project and my new home in peace. Patricia's eyes had lingered on the Mustang as we talked, and I could see the wheels turning. That's quite a loud vehicle, she said, her tone suggesting she'd already decided it was a problem. It's a classic, I replied. 1969 Boss 429. My father and I restored it together. She said, making a note on her clipboard. We'll need to review the noise ordinances. This is a family neighborhood, Mr. Morrison. Jack Morrison. Mr. Morrison. I do hope you'll be mindful of our community standards. With that, she'd turned on her heel and marched back to her house, leaving me standing there with a 3-inch binder and a growing sense that my peaceful retirement might be more complicated than I'd anticipated. Chapter 3, The gleam in his eyes. The trouble started during my second week in the neighborhood. I was in the garage detailing the Mustang's chrome, taking my time with each piece. The morning sun streamed through the open garage door, and I had my dad's old radio playing quietly in the background, classic rock, the soundtrack to countless Saturday mornings we'd spent together. I was working on the front bumper when I heard footsteps on my driveway. Tyler appeared at the edge of the garage, having walked right up like he owned the place. His designer sneakers squeaked against the concrete, and he was wearing clothes that probably cost more than most people's monthly car payment. Sweet ride, he said, his eyes immediately locking onto the Mustang. Without asking permission, he ran his hand along the fender, leaving fingerprints on the freshly waxed surface. V8 429 Cobra Jet, I replied, gently moving his hand away from the car. Just finished waxing that spot. His eyes lit up with that particular gleam I'd seen too many times before, in suspects' eyes when they spotted something they wanted to steal, in teenagers' eyes when they saw their first sports car, in entitled people's eyes when they decided they deserved something that wasn't theirs. The gleam that said, I want this, and I usually get what I want. You should let me take it for a spin, Tyler said, his voice carrying the casual confidence of someone who'd never been told no. I'm an excellent driver. Got my license last month. I almost laughed out loud. A 17-year-old with a month of driving experience behind the wheel of a 400-horsepower muscle car? Not in this lifetime. Sorry, son, I said, returning to polishing the chrome. This car doesn't leave the garage unless I'm driving it. Tyler's face darkened like a storm cloud rolling in. My dad pays a lot in HOA fees. Like, a lot. That basically means he owns part of this street. So technically, that makes me part owner of everything on it. The logic was so twisted I had to take a moment to process it. In my 20 years of law enforcement, I'd heard some creative interpretations of property law, but this was a new one. That's not how property ownership works, I said carefully, setting down my polishing cloth. We'll see about that, Tyler muttered, his voice carrying a threat that made my cop instincts kick in. He stormed off, his expensive sneakers squeaking in rapid succession. I watched him go, noting how he pulled out his phone before he'd even reached the sidewalk. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. 20 minutes later, right on schedule, Patricia was at my door. She'd changed into what I could only describe as her battle outfit, pressed white pants, a blazer with multiple HOA pins, and heels that clicked aggressively against my porch. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and she carried a leather portfolio that looked like it could contain legal documents. Mr. Morrison, she began, not bothering with pleasantries. Her voice was clipped, professional, like she was conducting a board meeting. My son tells me you were quite rude to him. I told him he couldn't drive my car, if that's what you mean. Her lips pursed into a thin line. Tyler is a very responsible young man. He's never had so much as a speeding ticket. When he shows interest in something, it's only neighborly to accommodate him. We're a community here, Mr. Morrison. We look out for each other. The way she said community made it sound like a threat. I could see where Tyler got his sense of entitlement. Ma'am, I said, keeping my voice level, that's a vintage muscle car worth more than most people's annual salary. I don't let anyone drive it. Not my neighbors, not my friends, not even my own officers. She sniffed, a sound that conveyed more disdain than words ever could. Well, we'll have to see if that vehicle even complies with HOA regulations. I'll be reviewing the guidelines tonight. And review she did. Chapter 4, The paper war. Over the next week, I received a series of increasingly ridiculous violation notices, each one more creative than the last. They appeared on my doorstep like clockwork, usually early in the morning when Patricia was on her community inspection walks. The first notice claimed the car was too loud, even though I'd never started it when she was around. I'd specifically made sure to only take it out when she wasn't home, not wanting to give her any ammunition. The second notice stated that the color was too bright and potentially distracting to other drivers. Apparently, grabber blue was now a traffic hazard. My personal favorite claimed that the car constituted a commercial vehicle because it could potentially be used for racing or other commercial automotive activities. By that logic, every car in the neighborhood was a commercial vehicle because it could potentially be used for Uber. Each notice was typed on official HOA letterhead, complete with case numbers and references to obscure subsections of the community guidelines. Patricia had clearly spent hours crafting these masterpieces of bureaucratic harassment. I responded to each notice with the patience of a saint, citing the actual HOA bylaws that proved none of her claims had merit. I'd been a cop for 20 years, I knew how to read legal documents, and I knew how to document everything. My responses were brief, professional, and completely demolished her arguments. I quoted section numbers, referenced precedents from other HOA cases, and politely but firmly explained why each violation notice was without merit. This only made her angrier. The notices started arriving daily. The car was improperly parked, it was perfectly centered in my driveway. The car was creating a public nuisance, no complaints from anyone else. The car was not in keeping with the neighborhood aesthetic. Apparently, classic American muscle cars didn't fit the vision of Riverside Heights. Then came the personal visits. Patricia would appear at my door at random times, always with her leather portfolio and her stern expression. She'd demand to inspect my property, claim she'd received complaints from other neighbors, and insist that I needed to work with the community to resolve these issues. Each time, I'd politely explain that she had no authority to inspect my property, that I'd received no complaints from anyone else, and that my car was completely within my rights as a property owner. Each time, she'd leave with her jaw clenched and her heels clicking more aggressively than before. Chapter 5, The escalation. The situation escalated dramatically when Tyler returned the following Saturday, this time with backup. I was mowing my lawn, enjoying the simple pleasure of maintaining my small piece of the American dream, when I heard voices in my driveway. "Hey, Mr. Morrison," Tyler called out, his tone artificially friendly. He'd brought 2 friends with him, both looked like they belonged on a high school football team, all swagger and barely contained aggression. Me and my boys were wondering if you'd reconsider about the car. Maybe just a quick ride around the block? I turned off the mower and wiped my hands on my jeans. The answer's still no, Tyler. One of his friends, a bulky kid in a football jersey with Raiders emblazoned across his chest, stepped forward. He was trying to look intimidating, puffing out his chest like a peacock. "Come on, man," he said, his voice carrying the casual arrogance of someone who'd never been told no. "Don't be such a hard ass. What's it gonna hurt? We're not gonna crash it or anything." "Yeah," added the other friend, a lanky kid with perfectly styled hair and designer sunglasses. "Tyler's dad basically owns this neighborhood. You should be cool with us." "Hey now," I said, my voice carrying the authority of 2 decades in law enforcement. I didn't raise my voice, but something in my tone made all 3 boys take a step back. "You boys need to head on home. This conversation's over." They left, but not before Tyler shot me a look that promised this wasn't over. As they walked away, I could hear them muttering about calling their dads and showing me who was boss. Sure enough, an hour later, Patricia was back, this time with reinforcements. Her husband Richard trailed behind her, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. He was a thin man with prematurely gray hair and the posture of someone who'd been beaten down by years of his wife's campaigns. "You threatened my son and his friends." Patricia shrieked before I could even open my mouth fully. "Richard is a lawyer, you know. We could sue you for emotional distress, harassment, maybe even assault." Richard winced at the mention of his profession, but said nothing. I'd looked him up after our first encounter. He was a tax attorney who probably hadn't seen the inside of a courtroom in years. The man specialized in helping wealthy clients avoid paying their fair share, not in pursuing harassment cases. Ma'am, I said, my voice perfectly calm, I asked them to leave my property. That's well within my rights as a homeowner. We'll see what the HOA board has to say about this. Patricia spun on her heel and marched off, Richard trailing behind with an apologetic shrug. Chapter 6. The meeting. The next HOA meeting was apparently quite the show, though I didn't attend. I had better things to do with my evening than listen to Patricia's latest conspiracy theories about me and my car. My next-door neighbor Janet filled me in the next morning. Janet was a retired teacher in her 60s, with silver hair and a sharp wit that had served her well through 30 years of dealing with difficult students and their parents. You missed quite the performance, she said, leaning against the fence that separated our properties. Patricia spent 40 minutes discussing the dangerous element that had moved into the neighborhood. She actually had a PowerPoint presentation about the dangers of street racing culture. I nearly choked on my coffee. A PowerPoint presentation? Complete with charts and graphs, Janet laughed. She actually used the word hooligan to describe you. Said your car was attracting the wrong element to our peaceful community. And what did the board say? Well, I pointed out that the only people bothering you were her and Tyler, but she didn't appreciate that observation. She claimed you were clearly planning something and that the neighborhood needed to take action before it was too late. Take action? Janet's expression grew serious. She's calling for a special assessment to hire private security. Claims we need to protect our property values from people like you. I shook my head. 20 years of police work, and I'd never encountered someone quite like Patricia Dalton. She was like a force of nature, destructive, unpredictable, and completely convinced of her own righteousness. Chapter 7. The harassment campaign. The harassment continued and escalated. I'd find notes tucked under my windshield wipers, usually early in the morning when Patricia was on her neighborhood walks. The notes were always typed, never handwritten, and always threatened some form of HOA action. Your vehicle continues to violate community standards. Compliance is mandatory. Neighbors are complaining about noise and disturbance. Immediate action required. The board is considering legal action. Cooperation is expected. My garbage cans would mysteriously tip over on trash day, always when I was at work and couldn't immediately clean up the mess. I'd come home to find my driveway covered in coffee grounds and banana peels, with a note from the HOA about maintaining property cleanliness. Someone called the city to report that my grass was half an inch too long. The inspector who came out was apologetic. Apparently, they'd been getting a lot of calls about my property, all from the same number. Look, Chief, he said, recognizing me from department meetings, your lawn is perfect. Someone's jerking our chain here. I know, I replied. Document everything. This is harassment, and I want it on record. The calls multiplied. My car was blocking the sidewalk, it wasn't. My sprinklers were running at non-authorized times, there were no authorized times. My mailbox was positioned incorrectly, it was exactly where the Postal Service had installed it. Each call was investigated, each complaint was documented, and each time, the city officials found nothing wrong. But Patricia didn't care about the results, she cared about the harassment. Chapter 8. The breaking point. Then came the day everything exploded. It was a Saturday morning, the kind of perfect spring day that made you grateful to be alive. I was enjoying my coffee in the kitchen, reading the newspaper and planning a quiet day of working on the Mustang, when I heard voices in my driveway. Through the window, I could see Tyler with his friends again, but this time they weren't just talking. They were taking selfies with my car through the garage window, posing and laughing like they were at some kind of car show. I stepped outside, still in my pajamas and robe, coffee mug in hand. Tyler, you need to leave. Now. It's just pictures, bro, he said, not even looking at me. He was too busy adjusting his phone angle to get the perfect shot. My followers love sick rides. This is gonna get so many likes. Get off my property. I won't ask again. That's when Tyler finally looked at me, and I saw something dangerous in his eyes. The entitled little boy was gone, replaced by someone who was genuinely angry. You know what? Screw you, he said, his voice rising. That car should be mine anyway. You're too old to appreciate it. You probably can't even drive it properly. What's the point of having something that awesome if you're just gonna let it sit in your garage? Tyler, I said, my voice dropping to what my officers called my chief voice, the tone that had convinced countless suspects to cooperate over the years. Leave now, or I'll call the police. He laughed, a sound full of malice and teenage arrogance. My mom already did. She said you stole this car. She looked up the registration, and it doesn't match your name. I sighed. Patricia had apparently discovered that the car was still registered under my father's name. I'd been meaning to transfer the title but hadn't gotten around to the paperwork yet. Between moving, starting the new job, and dealing with the constant harassment, it had slipped through the cracks. Yeah, Tyler continued, emboldened by what he thought was his trump card. She said the cops are gonna impound it, and then maybe someone who actually deserves it can buy it at auction. Someone young enough to actually drive it. That's when we heard the sirens. Chapter 9, The Reckoning. 3 patrol cars came screaming down our quiet street, lights blazing, sirens wailing. It was the full show, the kind of response you'd expect for an armed robbery or a domestic violence call. Patricia had apparently told dispatch that there was a stolen vehicle and that the thief was present and potentially dangerous. Neighbors came out of their houses, drawn by the commotion. Mrs. Chen from across the street, the Johnsons from next door, even old Mr. Peterson who rarely left his house anymore. They all stood on their porches or in their driveways, watching the spectacle unfold. Patricia emerged from her house like a queen approaching her throne, phone in hand, looking absolutely triumphant. She'd changed into her most official-looking outfit, a navy blue blazer with multiple HOA pins, pressed white pants, and her highest heels. Her hair was perfect, her makeup flawless. She looked like she was ready for her moment of vindication. Officers, she called out as the first car stopped, her voice carrying across the entire neighborhood. He's right there. The thief is right there. I recognized the officers immediately. Martinez and Davidson from the day shift, followed by Thompson and the rookie, Patel. These were good cops, experienced professionals who'd worked with me for years. The look on Martinez's face when he saw me standing there in my pajamas and robe, coffee mug still in hand, was absolutely priceless. His eyes went wide, then narrowed in confusion, then widened again as he processed what he was seeing. Chief Morrison? Martinez said, his voice a mix of confusion and growing concern. Sir, what's going on here? Morning, Martinez, I replied casually, taking a sip of my coffee. Beautiful day, isn't it? Patricia's mouth fell open. The color drained from her face so quickly I thought she might faint. Chief, she stammered. What do you mean, Chief? Davidson stepped forward, trying to keep his face professional, though I could see the corners of his mouth twitching. Ma'am, this is Chief Morrison. He's our boss. The chief of police for the entire city. The silence that followed was deafening. Patricia looked like she'd been hit by a truck. Tyler took several steps backward, suddenly very interested in his phone. Richard, who had just arrived on the scene, looked like he wanted to sink into the pavement and disappear forever. But the car, Patricia finally managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. The registration doesn't match. I checked. I did a thorough investigation. The car belonged to my father, I explained calmly, setting down my coffee mug on the porch railing. He passed away 6 months ago. I inherited it, but I haven't transferred the title yet. Would you like to see the will and death certificate? I didn't. Patricia was literally shaking now, her hands trembling as she clutched her phone. Martinez, I said, my voice taking on an official tone, I'd like you to take a full report. This woman called 911 to make a false report about a stolen vehicle. She's also been harassing me for 3 weeks because I wouldn't let her son drive my personal vehicle. Yes, sir, Martinez said, pulling out his notepad with professional efficiency. Wait. Patricia cried, her voice cracking. I didn't know. It was a mistake. I was just trying to protect the neighborhood. You called 911 and reported a stolen vehicle, I said evenly. You stated that you had checked the registration and that it didn't match the owner. That's not a mistake, Mrs. Dalton. That's a deliberate false report. Chapter 10, The Meltdown. Thompson had activated his body camera and was now facing Tyler, who was trying to look tough in front of his friends but clearly struggling to maintain his composure. Young man, Thompson said, his voice professional but firm, were you involved in this incident? Tyler, in what would prove to be the biggest mistake of his young life, decided to double down. Maybe it was the presence of his friends, maybe it was years of being told he could do no wrong, but he opened his mouth and sealed his fate. Yeah, so what, he said, his voice cracking slightly but still defiant. He's been a dick since he moved in. Thinks he's better than us just because he has some old car. Tyler, shut up, Richard finally spoke, but it was too late. The damage was done, and Tyler was just getting started. My mom runs this neighborhood, Tyler continued, his voice getting louder and more aggressive. She could buy and sell you. When my dad hears about this, you'll all be sorry. We'll sue the whole police department. My family has connections you wouldn't believe. Patel, the rookie, looked at me with wide eyes. I nodded for him to continue recording. Every word Tyler spoke was digging his hole deeper. The car should be mine anyway, Tyler ranted, now completely out of control. I deserve it more than some old man who doesn't even drive it. I'd actually use it, not just let it sit in the garage like some museum piece. Tyler, please, Richard pleaded, but his son was beyond listening. And another thing, Tyler said, pointing an accusing finger at me, you can't threaten me and my friends. My mom's gonna make sure you get fired. She knows people on the city council. The rookie's eyes were now as wide as saucers. In all his training, he'd probably never seen someone incriminate themselves so thoroughly. Chapter 11, the crowd gathers within the hour, the street was filled with neighbors. Word had spread quickly through the neighborhood, social media, phone calls, and old-fashioned porch-to-porch gossip had brought out everyone who could walk. Mrs. Chen had brought her teenage daughter, who was recording everything on her phone. The Johnsons had brought folding chairs, like they were settling in for a show. Even the Murphy family from the end of the street had arrived, their 3 young children staring wide-eyed at the police cars. Patricia was cited for filing a false police report and misuse of emergency services. Each citation came with a hefty fine and the possibility of court proceedings. Tyler was warned about trespassing and harassment, with the clear understanding that any future incidents would result in formal charges. The entire incident was captured on multiple body cameras, creating an official record that would follow both Patricia and Tyler for years to come. This is ridiculous. Patricia shrieked as Martinez handed her the citation. I'm on the HOA board. I keep this neighborhood safe. I protect property values. Ma'am, I said quietly, my voice carrying the authority of 2 decades in law enforcement, you weaponized the police because your son wanted my car. You wasted city resources and could have diverted officers from real emergencies. That's not keeping anyone safe, that's putting people in danger. Richard finally found his voice, though it was barely above a whisper. Patricia, we need to go. Now. He looked at me with genuine fear in his eyes, the look of a man who realized his wife had just committed professional suicide. Chief Morrison, he said, his voice shaking, I'm deeply sorry. This won't happen again. I promise you, this won't happen again. As they walked away, I could hear Patricia hissing at her husband about calling their lawyer, about suing for embarrassment, about how I'd regret this. Tyler sulked behind them, his bravado completely deflated, his friends having abandoned him the moment things got serious. Janet appeared at my elbow as the patrol cars pulled away, a satisfied smile on her face. Well, she said, that was quite the show. I just wanted a quiet Saturday morning, I replied, picking up my coffee mug. Oh, you're not done yet, Janet grinned. Wait until the HOA board hears about this. Patricia's called an emergency meeting for tomorrow night. My guess is she won't be president much longer. She was right. Chapter 12, the digital age. The body camera footage was requested through public records within days. Someone, I never found out who, had submitted a Freedom of Information Act request for all footage related to the incident. In the digital age, government transparency meant that Patricia's meltdown was about to become very public. Someone, again I never discovered who, posted clips of the incident online. The video went viral within hours. Entitled HOA President Calls Cops on Police Chief garnered millions of views across multiple platforms. Tyler's rant about his parents buying and selling people became a meme, shared and reshared until it reached every corner of the internet. The comments were merciless. People shared their own HOA horror stories, their encounters with entitled neighbors, their frustration with petty tyrants who wielded tiny amounts of power like weapons. Patricia and Tyler had become symbols of everything wrong with suburban entitlement. Local news picked up the story. HOA president files false police report against police chief led the evening news for 3 straight days. The reporter, a young woman with perfect hair and a serious expression, stood in front of my house as she detailed the incident. This quiet suburban neighborhood became the center of a social media storm this week, she intoned, when an HOA president called police to report a stolen vehicle, only to discover the supposed thief was actually the city's chief of police. The story spread beyond local news. National media picked it up, late-night comedy shows made jokes about it, and social media influencers created response videos. Patricia and Tyler had achieved a kind of fame, but not the kind they'd wanted. Chapter 13, The Emergency Meeting. At the emergency HOA meeting the following Sunday evening, Patricia tried desperately to maintain control. She'd prepared talking points, printed handouts, and arranged the meeting room exactly as she liked it. But the writing was on the wall, and everyone could see it. The community center was packed. Neighbors who hadn't attended an HOA meeting in years showed up, drawn by the promise of drama and the chance to finally confront their dictatorial president. The room buzzed with excitement and anticipation. Patricia called the meeting to order with her usual authority, but her voice was shaky. She'd clearly been crying, her makeup was smudged, and her usual perfect composure was cracked. "We're here to discuss the unfortunate incident that occurred yesterday," she began, consulting her notes. "I want to assure everyone that I was acting in the best interests of the community." That's when the floodgates opened. Neighbors who had suffered under Patricia's reign for years finally found their courage. Story after story of petty harassment, arbitrary fines, and abuse of power filled the room. The Chens talked about being fined for having the wrong color flowers. The Johnsons described harassment over their basketball hoop. The Petersons recounted threats over their garden decorations. "She fined me $50 because my garbage can was 6 inches too far from the curb," said Mrs. Rodriguez, standing up in the back of the room. 6 inches. "She tried to make me remove my American flag because it was too large," added Mr. Thompson, a veteran who'd served 3 tours in Afghanistan. "Said it was a visual distraction." "She threatened to sue me because my dog barked during the day," said Jennifer Walsh, holding her toddler. "During the day? Dogs bark?" The stories kept coming. Hours of accumulated frustration and anger poured out as neighbors finally felt safe to speak up. Patricia sat at the front of the room, growing smaller and smaller as each story was told. When it came time for the vote, the result was never in doubt. Patricia was removed from the HOA board by a unanimous vote, the first unanimous vote in the neighborhood's history. As she stood to leave, Patricia turned to face the room one last time. Her voice was breaking, her composure completely shattered. "You'll all regret this," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I made this neighborhood what it is. I protected your property values. I maintained standards." "No," said Janet, standing up slowly. "You made this neighborhood a dictatorship. Now we can finally make it a community." Patricia fled the room in tears, leaving behind her carefully organized notes and her dreams of suburban supremacy. Richard stayed behind to apologize to everyone, mentioning quietly that they would be putting their house on the market. Chapter 14, Justice Served. The false police report charge came with serious consequences. When Patricia appeared in court 3 weeks later, Judge Hendricks, who I'd known for 15 years, was particularly unimpressed with her excuse that she was just being a concerned citizen. "Mrs. Dalton," he said, looking over his reading glasses with a stern expression that had intimidated countless defendants, "you admitted to checking the registration, finding what you perceived as a discrepancy, and immediately calling 911 without making any attempt to verify your suspicions. You then told responding officers that the vehicle was stolen. That's not the action of a concerned citizen, that's malicious intent." Patricia's lawyer, a young man in an expensive suit who clearly wished he was anywhere else, tried to argue for dismissal. He cited Patricia's exemplary record of community service and suggested that the incident was a misunderstanding that got out of hand. Judge Hendricks wasn't buying it. The body camera footage was damning. Patricia's own words, captured in high definition, showed her clearly stating that she had investigated the registration and determined that the car was stolen. "Mrs. Dalton," the judge continued, "you weaponized the police force because you were angry about a personal dispute.